So that's from the top of K2. It's one of the cases that we are investigating. I just wanted to show you because I really, really love that kind of sequence of a video. But what I'm going to be talking mostly about today is the experiences that we had on Everest 2 seasons ago. But this also illustrates our research interest. We are interested in kind of human behaviors and how organizations works. So decision-making being a huge part of it. And also, we believe that expeditions are an incredibly good way in order to understand common organizations because they are kind of so focused, so we can really understand kind of the behaviors of organizations. I'm not doing this myself, obviously. And I'm running a research program called EED, Extreme Environments Everyday Decision. And the idea here is that we are not interested in really like the accidents as K2, for example, or Everest 96. We do work on them, but it's not our main interest. Our interest is on expeditions when they actually functions, when it works. Kind of what is it that triggers these organizations? What is the kind of behaviors of people? And how do people cooperate? What kind of routines do they have in order to make an expedition work or not work? I run a research team. I think we're 7 or 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, yeah, we're a bunch at least. And we're an international group of scholars, mainly from Europe, but we collaborate with researchers at HEC Montreal, for example, Stanford, and University in Paris as well. And we are mainly kind of a social science kind of group, so we are not so much into the kind of technical stuff, but we're more of a kind of trying to understand behaviors. One of our focuses then is commercialization of mountaineering in addition to this decision-making perspective, because we think that in order to understand decision-making, we also need to understand the wider context of things. What is it that triggers the industry? What is it that triggers people that are working in this industry? Why are they doing stuff? And this will be an extension of the current research program. So, for example, then we are trying to understand why people come to work in mountaineering, for example, or how do one become a climbing guide? What is the kind of economy behind it all? And for example, one thing would be where you have the kind of differentiation between, if one like, kind of non-guided climbers and guided climbers, and kind of how people move between these logics or practices, and what kind of implications that then have for how the organization works, how the decisions are made, who's making the decisions, and so on. And it was also, as part of this, that we put together this panel that we had at Stanford, where we had, for example, Bill Burke, we had Jordan Romero, we had Irene Beardsley, and Chris Klinke, talking about different perspectives on organizations based on their experiences, and kind of having a discussion. I must say, it was incredibly interesting to hear the perspectives. I've been so fortunate also to be speaking with a bunch of climbers and getting to know climbers, because it's kind of, it's so interesting what's happening. It's so interesting. Anyway, what I'm mostly going to be talking about is that season then for two seasons ago. And the focus would be then decision-making and organizing in this kind of expedition. As Ellen mentioned as well, I mean, we are doing work on emergency rooms also, but I'm not going to be talking about that necessarily today. But just to mention it a little bit short, we have one case on Stanford, the ER there, and we have one case in a Swedish ER, and trying to compare those and how they work. And the next step would be to compare it to how decisions are made, how things are organized at the expedition compared to emergency rooms, and see whether there's something to learn between those. I must say, I have a confession to make, and that's one thing. I guess it's kind of crucial. I'm not a climber. Everyone asks me, are you a climber? And it's like, no. It might seem a little bit strange, funny, or whatever. I love reading the books and so on. But as part of that expedition then 2 years ago, we had the opportunity of climbing Lobuche East and kind of, I don't know, it's not much for you guys that have been to Everest and so on, so it's kind of, I'm not going to make a big deal of it. But for me personally, it was such a revelation. It's kind of, you come to understand, I mean, why you love being in the mountains, why you love climbing. Anyway, it was such a kind of emotional feeling. And the reason for telling it is that picture is from Lobuche. So it's kind of overlooking Everest Base Camp and so on. What we did then was that we had a research team. There were 5 of us. So it was me and 4 research assistants. And the reason why we had such a big group of researchers going in with one particular expedition was that we felt that, well, we don't know how we're going to handle altitude, if people are going to get sick and so on. But also it allowed us to kind of look on the expedition from several points of view. Both that we had different kind of educations and so on, but also that I mean, every person comes with their own kind of interpretation of events. So we could be looking on the same event, but from several different positions, which turned out to be great when it came to kind of analytical purposes. As you can see, it's a rather small outfit that we followed. It was 9 climbers. I think it was 14 with us researchers. One of the researchers, he was also a mountaineer, so he was actually going up to 8,000 meters collecting data with a team of climbers. Unfortunately, the money didn't make it, so we couldn't go for Everest, but he had to go for Lhotse instead. But it was high enough. Definitely. So you have to bear in mind that this is the actual first time I ever have had a presentation in shorts. So you have to bear with me. And it might also be the first and only time you're going to see a professor having a kind of a presentation in shorts. But anyway, I'm going to tell you a little bit, kind of to demystify a little bit about what we as researchers does. Because one of the things I would like you to know is that, I mean, in order to conduct the research, we need the input of people like you in order to understand what is going on and also to be able to maybe contribute something back. So this was the kind of research setting we had to work with. We had the kind of interviews on the path down kind of up to Everest, kind of walking next to people and just chatting with them about topics. I mean, what they felt about risk, for example, what they felt about the group dynamics and so on. Ethnography, meaning that we are looking into kind of observing what is going on in an expedition. What are people doing? What are people saying? Who are they talking to? At what point? And so on. So that's what was what we took notes on during the days. And then, as you can see here, Susanna, one of the research assistants, she's sitting there in the dining tent and writing things up. And basically, this is how it might look like. We were carrying around notebooks, taking notes about what was going on. Used the iPhones, taking notes. As you can see, that's the kind of oxygen level of in the blood and so on, because one of the great experiences and not so great experiences, it was that I had some case of altitude sickness. So we started to kind of monitoring the oxygen level of the blood. I must say it was not a very pleasant experience. It was also quite an experience of trying to actually conduct data when you feel like shit, literally. But it was fun. So anyway, taking those, let's see. Taking those notes, then we transform it into kind of written notes about what was going on. And just to give you a sense of how much documentation it is, just the notes comprise about 1,200 pages, kind of what was going on during these 2 months. And we had to try to make sense of that in some way. We also have video ethnography, meaning that we are using cameras to record what was going on the mountain. For example, here, this is on the way up on Lobuche East, just to kind of be able to see how are people moving and so We have radio communication between what was going on in base camp and what was going on higher up within this particular expedition, of course. And so we have that kind of stuff, and trying to listen into what is actually happening and so on, and then also trying to use the material that we're collecting in terms of interviews, in terms of observations and so on to understand what is going on. As I said, I've become sick as well, and that was on that occasion. Altitude sickness, no fun. But on the other hand, it was a humbling experience, but it was also I think it was quite important to have that experience in order to understand how and why people behave as they do on the mountain, in a sense. Because, I mean, you have the drive of accomplishing things, and no, it was interesting. So, one of the papers that we have been working on that is focused on the organizational routines then. And now you have to bear in mind that, I mean, we have papers on the K2 accident, for example. Ellen, you have read it, which is focused on leadership and kind of what happened there. And we argue that, well, in that particular paper, it was that it was not a matter of leadership as such, but it was about kind of a collective leadership that occurred due to working in a kind of a project environment, which we will then, we argue that the expedition is a project environment. So it's kind of, that's why the expedition works so well in terms of transforming it to, transferring it to ordinary industries. Anyway, rules of the game then, that's focused on the kind of everyday activities that are happening and the routines within an expedition. And just to give you a small kind of taste of it, we are kind of identifying a number of routines that are key to things in order to kind of organize the expedition and so on. And for example, then the sourcing routine, kind to have the right stuff in the right place and so on, but also trying to kind of juggle the needs of the what the clients want to have done and what is actually possible. I mean, for example, a client wants to have his huge camera carried, and it's like, come on, it's kind of going to exceed the limit of what these people actually can do. It's kind of, at least have the decency to pay. I mean, it's kind of, it was quite interesting, and see how the kind of expedition leader kind of trying to have a safe operation while at the same time kind of caring for the clients, because the client's going to ensure future business and so on. And that's also why I think it's so important to understand the kind of the logics of the economics behind things. The rescheduling routine, basically, if something happens, to be able to change things around in order to have the proper kind of acclimatization schedule and so on. Risk and safety, of course. This particular expedition, they were blasted by an avalanche just above the icefall. I mean, they was just experiencing the powder of it, but still kind of before the clients had been moving quite slow through the icefall and so on. But after getting this kind of snow in the face and realizing, hey, this is actually really dangerous, then they got a point and kind of raced for the rest of the expedition through that point. But I also think that speaks to one of the issues with the clients might be that when they don't have the proper kind of experience of higher mountains and so on, they don't have the kind of climbing experience. They are therefore kind of topping out, so to say. Then it's also hard. You could tell them, well, the icefall, it's a dangerous place. People get killed there. But it's not until they actually have some kind of experience of it that they actually realize that it's a real life danger. The organizing routine. For example, then there was a client that had issues with a former expedition, and he kind of transferred those issues to this current expedition, and kind of the expedition leader trying to juggle that at the same time as, I mean, it was clearly out of bounds, so to say. And the partnering routine then, that would be kind of how expeditions are working together, for example, with icefall doctors and establishing the routes up on the mountain, or kind of working with insurance companies and helicopter services and so on. And the argument then is that, well, these are some of the routines, and in order to kind of safely manage an expedition, one has to kind of care for them. And I think that's also what distinguishes kind of expeditions that might be safer compared to kind of expeditions that are putting on more risks, in a sense, or kind of a low end and a high end kind of expedition and whatever you have there between. Because when the experiences are not there on behalf of the people in the expedition, leading the expedition, when that's not there and the clients are expecting them to have the experience and so on, then there's going to be a mismatch, and that's where the accidents occur. And that's also when other expeditions have to kind of stand in order to kind of save people that have been kind of abandoned on the mountain, if one would like. Some initial thoughts. We're going to have the panel tomorrow about it, so we're going to be speaking more about it. But as I said, we see the expedition as a temporary organization or as a project, like a construction project, an IT project, or whatever. I think that's something we can learn a lot from. But also, more importantly, is that in a project, then the point in those is that they're going to have a predetermined end. So that means also that the people are the carriers of the routines. And in order to have safe operations, you need to have a routine. So the people are key in order to develop kind of safe measurements. And then kind of the routines and the capabilities to enact the routines, that also what kind of provides stability within the organization. We can skip that. As I was saying before also, that I think the ability to consider those routines is also what separates expeditions from each other. And I would argue that in order to kind of improve safety on mountains such as Everest or so on, one needs to have some kind of certification body, some kind of independent certification body that kind of certifies expeditions and says that, well, this expedition, they have this kind of knowledge and they could be relatively safe compared to this one at least. And of course, in order to achieve that, one needs to work with kind of local initiatives and so on, but also more importantly, I think it needs to be some kind of international body in order to do that. And for example, then, I come out of research.
Not available. Connect to the internet.
Then you know. But as I said, I'm coming out of kind of project management research. And within project management, what you would have there is kind of a certification body which certifies project managers. And people are not required to have those certifications, but what we could see is that the number of certification increases because the clients are demanding that the project manager is certified in order to have kind of a better project, a project that kind of comes in within time, within budget, and so on. Or in this case, then, well, in an expedition where people might not get killed unnecessarily, at least. I mean, we're never going to get around all the casualties and so on, but at least it would reduce some of the really unnecessary ones. So that was just a kind of a taste of one of the papers that we are working on. And if you're interested in the research project of ours, you can go to tripled.com, which basically describes the research, and we have a bunch of references to our work. And if you drop me an email, I would be happy to send you whatever we have. All right. Thank you. But no tricky ones. I know that you know the mountains better than I do.
Do you have any of this published yet?
Yeah.
Cool.
Sure. No worries.
When you look at any expeditions from the 1960s and the 1970s, some of the big siege style trips, you look at the style of road management that was employed then. Quite interesting to look again and compare it to some of the modern smaller trips these days.
Yeah. Actually, that's what we are hoping to be able to do when we are looking into the commercialization side. Because what we would like to do is to go back to when basically mountaineering started and look in archives, in books, and so on, in order to kind of see the difference in how things were back then and how things are today, in order to understand the kind of practices of today. But we have not looked into it specifically so far. No. If that was a answer.
I think it's, it's obviously very different.
Yeah, definitely.
Can you share any general impressions or anecdotal things about how people's behavior tends to change when they're physically compromised in those kinds of situations, and how that relates to the organization of the unit? Or how successfully the unit works or doesn't work?
Yeah, I would say that, I mean, the higher up on the mountain they got, I mean, kind of then the physical dangers increased as well. I would say then the behavior become much more focused, both in terms of the kind of guides that we were studying and so on, but also from the clients. I mean, they were much more kind of strict about routines, strict about correct behaviors and so on. While further down below, it was kind of, okay, you settle routines, this is what you're supposed to follow, but it's not strictly enforced.
And what about from the client's perspective? How did their behavior change, and how did that change the dynamic of the team?
How should I put this delicately? No, but I mean, one of the big issues I would say is that, I mean, when we got to base camp and they were starting to see expeditions going up on the mountain for acclimatization and so on, then they were kind of ants in the pants, kind of jumping up and down. We want to go, we want to go, we want to go. And kind of expedition leaders like, yeah, well, kind of slow down, we're going to do it, but we need to establish things first and so on. And that really started to nag on the team. I mean, kind of on the social processes that was going on. And one of the clients that was, how should I put it? He tried a small mutiny, but it cleared up later on. I mean, it worked out. But I think it's the fact that, I mean, the higher up they got, the more real the summit became, the more kind of eager they were to kind of continue up. I think that's also parts of the danger, because, I mean, that's when you're not as objective as you should be. Long answer to.
Did you use any psychometric testing prior to going in?
No. We are working on kind of together with a psychiatrist that has been doing work on climbers and so on, but that's kind of still really much an embryo so far. But we have not. Interestingly, found that climbers and what do you call them? The people in prisoners. They had a similar kind of personality. I'm sorry, it was not my research.
So what was the makeup of the group? Were there 2 guides and 7 clients, or was it a mix of serious mountaineers that are mountaineers outside of just this trip?
It was 9. Let's see how it was. It was kind of a special one. It was kind of 2 expeditions within one expedition, because some of them were really experienced. So they were trying to go on Everest without oxygen, but later on decided to do it with supplemental oxygen. But let's see, I think the ratio kind of between guide and client, it was 1-to-1. So I guess it would be like 18 altogether, something like that. I don't have the numbers in my head. So.
You're studying the whole group.
We're studying the whole group, yeah. Yeah.
Did you study the colleagues that help them, the support staff for them too?
Yeah. No, we studied the entire expedition, so including the kitchen personnel and everything, in order to understand kind of how you grew into the work, so to say.
So how big was that group overall? Sorry.
I don't have the real numbers, but I would guess it 20, 25, something like that.
Your researchers, they also visited other expeditions and with a questionnaire, right?
Yeah.
And what was that about?
What it was a part of?
That questionnaire, because it wasn't specific to your expedition that you're following.
Yeah.
So, I mean, was that for something else?
No, it was for the same. The idea was just to get a kind of a picture of the broader scene, so to say, and also understand whether, I mean, kind of the expedition that we were studying in detail, if that was a kind of anomaly, or if it would be somewhat similar on other expeditions. So, no, it was definitely a part of it. But it's a matter of the triangulation of things in order to ensure that you're looking at the right things.
Was part of the scope of your research to find correlations between the two fields that you studied? Like one was the medical emergency room and then the other one was expedition?
We hope to be able to contribute to the both settings by comparing them, but we don't know it yet. It's just one of our ideas, and then we'll see whether it flies or not.
Have you found any traits in the group that help the group stay together when things get difficult?
How should yeah. I mean, the group as such, I would say, worked really, really well in terms of clients and guides and everything, because, I mean, they were coming together as friends. I mean, they had never met before, but kind of later on in the expedition, they were coming together as friends, meaning that if someone had a rough day, I mean, they were supporting each other and so on. And I think that comes from, I mean, you're spending a lot of time together in a quite isolated part of the world, so it's kind of, it was really social people, but then they had kind of different roles within that kind of group of people. I mean, one was kind of the DJ, and one was the kind of a clown, and you know, kind of nice group of people.
Markus, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
I'm trying to force Markus to answers as an academic. Of course, he says we don't have all the data. But to shorthand what you've observed so far, is it fair to say that those expeditions that have a lot of set routines and rules and orders for how to do things and how to handle certain situations are probably operate better or safer? In other words, if you were going to have a rule for how you run a good expedition, have a thick rule book might be the foundation.
Mm.
Is that a fair statement, or?
Yeah. Actually, to be honest, I can't complain that I haven't got enough data. The problem is I have too much data. No, but in terms of statements, I mean, I personally believe that, I mean, this climbing thing, that's about taking risks. But you need to take measured risks, so on. And then I think it's really, really important to have kind of rules of behaviors, if one would like. I mean, kind of, for example, if you start to realize, well, we are really pushing it, okay, so it might be worth it because the weather is good and so on, but what you need to realize is also that you're increasing the risks by that. I mean, for example, then going back to the K2 case, I mean, when we have spoken to the survivors of it and kind of trying to get their views of things, and I mean, most of them are saying that, well, we weren't doing anything wrong. I mean, it was beautiful weather, we had a chance of a lifetime to get up on K2. It was kind of now or never. And they knew they were late at the same time. But they were just, it's just kind of, okay, we are increasing the risks, but the risks are still on the kind of right side of us to accept it. And then when the kind of avalanche came, they cut the ropes and so on, then the margins weren't there anymore. And that's when the problems became. But if they would have been, I mean, if they had stuck to the kind of plan they had from the beginning and saying that, well, okay, we are running late, as some of the climbers did and turned around, then the problems wouldn't have been there. But I mean, that's part of the problem also with the research. We won't know, because if the avalanche hadn't been there, well, then the problems might not have happened. Then they might have just come down to Camp 4 within darkness, and we wouldn't have like 6 books and so much written about K2 in 2008. So it's not easy to say, but I would still say it's a fair conclusion to say that, well, in order to have safer operations, we also need to have routines for things.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Markus.
All right.